really excited to have with me today Melanie Notkin, who is a bestselling author. She is an influencer. She has built a really amazing business that we're going to hear about that is called SAVVY Auntie. We're going to talk more about that and Melanie's background because Melanie, you and I have known each other for years, and I just think one of the things that really was an impetus for having us ask you to be on and do the Facebook Live and do the podcast is that you have really built a following and you have staying power. And that's one of the things that I just love so much about, different influencers in the space. And I know that you do more than just influence in terms of being an influencer. But I think one of the really cool things is that you have been able to take an idea and build it and kind of have your audience come along with you. So tell us a little bit about how you started SAVVY Auntie, a little bit about yourself maybe first, and then how you started SAVVY Auntie.
First of all, thank you so much, Eliza, for inviting me to do this. I'm thrilled and honored to be a part of this. I know that this is relatively new for you guys, and to be part of She Speaks in this type of conversation is thrilling for me. And I'm so happy that we're simulcasting, simul streaming with the SAVVY Auntie entourage, as I call them. So hopefully our cohorts are connecting as well. So I launched SAVVY Auntie in 2008, which is crazy hard to believe. And it stemmed from the idea that as an aunt, and I became an aunt in 2001, that I found myself, literally when at the time in early 2000s, I was working for a global beauty brand, literally flying back and forth to Paris, France. And I would do what the cosmopolitan aunt thinks she should do. I would bring my nephew and nieces these glorious gifts from Paris, France, but they didn't want those. Yeah. They wanted Dora the Explorer and Bob the Builder, and I didn't know those people. I did not know who they were. So even though I was this savvy cosmopolitan beauty executive, I wasn't feeling very savvy as an aunt, even though I had all of the maternal instincts that, of course, I'm besotted by my nephew and nieces. They were toddlers then. They're teenagers now, and I'm still besotted by them. And, of course, they love me. Of course, they happen to love me, like, fortunate that I was. And so I realized there was a market gap. That, when moms were talking about things like bugaboos, of what is a bugaboo, moms have a whole language that I wasn't aware of. And it wasn't just me or my friends or my friends' friends. I realized when I was creating this site in 2007 that women of fertile age, which the U.S. Census looks their fertility reporting that started in 1976, so 35 years before I was launching, that about 44% of American women were childless. That number is now 50%, or just nearing 49 point something. And so we have this huge cohort of women who are having their first child later than ever before. And so I decided to launch a platform for this group of women. And while it is for every aunt, whether she's an aunt by choice, to her friends' children, or of course an aunt by relation, I specifically focus on a demographic I coined called PANK, P like Peter, PANK, or professional aunt, no kids. So this is a cohort of women, about 23 million between the ages of 20 and 50 in the United States, women who, for whatever reason, by choice, challenge, or like me, circumstance, do not have children, or do not yet have children, or do not want children of their own. And so this cohort is quite influential, not only socially with the family and their friends, but also in the economy. So here was a market opportunity that came from, long story to answer your quite concise question, that I saw that, well, this is not just me. These are women who are generally college graduates, independent women who love the children in their life. And some may look at them as pre-moms. As now we know, actually, a woman is more likely to have her first child at age 30 or older than in her 20s, so, or certainly teens. So here's a cohort that is growing, and that is, again, one of the most influential in terms of their consumer buying power.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you know, the other thing that I think is interesting too about this is that, you know, women now do it so differently than maybe how it was for a generation before us, and you know, certainly than the generation before them. And there's so many different ways, and women are, as you said, having children older. So talk a little bit about, you know, your own decision, right? You are a pank yourself. So talk a little bit about your background in terms of kind of making that decision. And I know you've written a book that I mentioned earlier that is called Otherhood. Can you talk a little bit about the book? Yep, I see it right over your shoulder.
There.
A little bit about the book.
Oh.
How did that end up there?
I don't know.
But could you talk a little bit about the book and kind of what prompted you to write it? Because I know it's a memoir, it's a very personal story. So can you talk a little bit about it?
Well, I always expected to have children. It was my dream. I mean, when I was about 12 years old, I even bought a baby name book because I had decided somehow, came out of nowhere because there are no twins in my family, that I was going to have twin daughters. Buffy and Bonnie, don't judge. I like alliteration. And those names changed over time. But this was like my vision. Somehow out of nowhere, I'm going to have these twin girls and then maybe a little boy. And that dream actually did come true for my brother. Mm-hmm. He had twin girls. I did not. In fact, I haven't married, and I did not have children and won't have children. And for me, the experience of being a Gen X woman who, you know, had expected to have love, marriage, and motherhood, along with the education and the career that our mothers didn't have access to. Mm-hmm. But the stuff that they, you know, the quote unquote normal everyday things that not all women, but many girls and young women and women want or expect, well, naturally I'd have that. And it wasn't happening in my late 30s, which is part of the impetus for creating SAVVY Auntie. And I thought, gosh, you know, I know, again, it's not just me. And certainly there are women who are child-free by choice. And I champion that choice, and SAVVY Auntie is for every aunt. That's not the issue. Mm-hmm. But most women, so at age 40 plus, women who are childless, 50% of them, the CDC reports, are child-free by choice. Mm-hmm. Although some of them are child-free at 40 because if it hadn't happened by 40, mm-hmm. They don't want a child in their 40s. Mm-hmm. Or women who are childless by circumstance because they remain single, and or maybe there's a health problem. And then there is a smaller percentage of those who are childless because of a fertility challenge. Now, at this cohort, again, it's getting longer. Again, like I said, you're more likely to have your first child at age 30 plus. Mm-hmm. And it's not because, you know, when people will say, you know, well, you know, that you're delaying. And, you know, generally the women who have their first child at age 35 plus, again, are college graduates. They may even have a master's degree. Mm-hmm. It's not because they don't know their fertility math. Certainly not because they don't have a reminder every month. Mm-hmm. You know, it's that they're waiting for love.
Right.
And somehow, because that doesn't sound feminist, mm-hmm. right? Because the one thing you can't control, you can control, you know, your grades to get into a great school. You can control all the things that you want to do, you know, with your career as much as you can control where you live. There's so much you can control. The one thing you can't control is falling in love, or the guy who, you know, you fall in love with who loves you back, or that he wants a commitment. Mm-hmm. And that's assuming you're heterosexual, and then, you know, there are all the other challenges. So I wrote Otherhood because I began to write about my experience in a very I would say, certainly authentic, certainly vulnerable way. And while some people would have said to me that it was very brave, for me, it wasn't brave at all. For me, it was a way to connect with other women like me, because the response from those women is extraordinary.
Right.
There's response from women to finally not feel like they're alone, because they've done everything they can to have the life that they expected. And yet, instead of motherhood, they remain in the otherhood.
Yeah. Well, and your decision was based on, you certainly could have on your own had a child, but you decided for yourself, and I know you talk about this, that for yourself, you wanted to have somebody that you fell in love with that you would share that experience with, as opposed to, just saying, well, the mission, the goal is to have the children, and I'm just going to go about it kind of any way that I need to go about it. So what was the most surprising thing that, in terms of how people reacted? I know you said you've had so really wonderful feedback from women, not just to the book, but just you are very open and honest about your experience. What has been most surprising or gratifying to you about what women have said to you?
Yeah, there is that assumption that women who don't have children either don't want children, or if you don't have a child on your own, well, real women, modern women can do this. No, I want a child with the man I love. And it's hard enough, for parents to raise children, to a couple to raise children. So, and again, to be able to admit I shouldn't even say the word admit, to be able to say these things, again, that don't sound feminist. But I will say one quick note is that what we do know actually from the fertility and birth rate data is that for the first time, most birth rates are down. The only uptick that we see is for women 40 plus. Technology is enabling women to have that child later. And there are certainly women who are having a child on their own at that point. But again, it's a small segment. And even those women still wanted to have a child with someone that they love. So the reactions from women has been extraordinary, continues to be extraordinary. I mean, things I wrote for Huffington Post or Psychology Today or my book, which came out a few years ago already. Now women who are maybe, let's say, in their early 30s when that happened, now they're 40. Something I wrote in 2012, I'm getting emails from. Women they see themselves in my story. And that's what's really powerful about memoir, about those types of essays, is to see themselves in those stories and to know that notwithstanding my dream, notwithstanding grief, notwithstanding the things that didn't happen, my life is wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm a happy woman. And that this isn't the thing that defines me. Although, yes, it does define my career, to be fair,
Right.
But it doesn't define me as a woman.
And so that part of what you're saying, because so many women do define themselves, is when you start to have children, it can be such an all-consuming experience. And I'm curious to hear, I think that there is some, interesting insight that I've seen you write about as it relates to kind of just really understanding yourself and what that process is. And obviously you went through a different a soul searching on your own to make kind of the decision that you made of saying, look, as much as I very much wanted children, you talked about how you had a baby naming book that you got when you were very young. But as much as that was part of who you thought you would be, how were you able to kind of go through that process of sort of saying, okay, I am going to make the conscious decision that I'm not going to do this unless I find somebody I'm going to fall in love with to do this with. So can you talk a little bit about that, how that experience was for you, and how you did it? Because I think there's a really interesting insight in being self-aware. And I mean, to me, that is such an enormously self-aware thing to make a decision to do. Here's something that you dreamed about since you were a little girl, right? To have children, but understanding that you really, knowing yourself, you needed to do that with somebody who you fell in love with, as opposed to just doing it on your own, or just somebody finding a guy. I mean,
Sure.
finding a partner.
Yeah. And all of these decisions, by the way, are right for the women who decide to make those decisions. This is not, I'm certainly not saying that my decision was the right decision for everybody. And this is certainly not judging anybody's decisions. So, a number of factors. First of all, I would say that, I'm 51 now. So this would be even going back like a decade ago where I really have to make that decision, right? So we weren't really talking about women having babies on their own as much as we do now. Then. So I don't know that it was like a decision that I ever really debated in terms of, I mean, there were moments, and certainly I thought about it. And in fact, even egg freezing was not something that was technically viable back in a decade ago when I even potentially had eggs to freeze, right? And in fact, I've written about, I wrote something for the New York Post where I'm a contributor about how when I turned 50, I was actually happy I didn't freeze my eggs, because I interviewed women, and I have friends who did freeze their eggs in their late 30s, early 40s. And now as they approach 50, the timeline of when they can grieve and move on is stretched for a decade.
Oh, interesting.
Because those eggs are there. There's still the chance. Right? And so what happens when you come to your early 40s and it's likely not going to happen?
Right.
You have to move forward, right? Life is moving forward. You got to catch that train because otherwise you're not living an authentic experience. So, and again, not to say that women shouldn't freeze their eggs. Again, not judging. It's just the other side of the coin of not being able to let go.
Yeah.
So, a few months ago, I was on a date with this guy, and he seeked me out and had done some research, and we were having a nice time, having a drink. I was laughing, all good, happy, generally happy. And he said something to me out of the blue about, I looked you up, and you write about that you really wanted kids and you didn't have them, and by the way, I should just say that for the Kirkus review said it was fun and sexy. The book is not, there are sad moments, but my life is not sad. The memoir is not, this is not a sad thing, but for whatever reason, he decided it was very heavy and sad. And I said, you had mentioned something, and I won't be too detailed because I don't want to give him away, but that his ex-wife had written a book, and so one could tell that perhaps his child had gone through something. And I said, life is a struggle. And the meaning of life is how you handle the struggle and what you do with it. And so for me, I took the struggle of the life I always expected, and I turned it into a celebration of aunthood. I turned it into a voice so that other women wouldn't feel alone in this experience. I turned it into something that was meaningful to me and to other women. So, when you live in the struggle, you have to see the opportunity to say, what can you do with that? Yeah. What is it that from that experience that you can take and lend to other people so that they can feel less alone?
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. I think that one of the things that is so special about the fact that you have shared your story and you're very honest, and I know you've written a lot, not just in your books, but also just about, just generally, your experiences. And I think one of the things that is so useful about that is that people can, as you said, recognize that there's something in themselves, no matter who they are. Because I've read things, I have 2 children, but I've read things you've written, and I've thought, I see myself in that. I see myself in this part of what she's talking about, because there, as you said, we are all, there's so much that in terms of our lives, right? There's so many parts to us. Being a parent is, for the people who have children, being a parent is one of those parts of their lives, but there is so much more to it, and to who we are. And so I think that it is such a gift that you have given women the opportunity to share and understand your experience so that they can take from that experience for themselves. For women who are also maybe in a similar situation where they're childless, and that they understand that there's so much more to life and who they can be and what they can do and what a rich and fulfilling life they can have. And I think that you bring that to the table for women, and it's a gift. So I see with your question. I know actually it's someone commenting that they really appreciate that you share your story. And I think it's, we are not there. You probably have a lot of women who have told you this over the years, that you sharing your story is a source of inspiration. So I guess I would ask you, what's your best piece of advice for women who, are kind of at a point in their lives where maybe they're deciding, is this what I want? How do I go about making this decision? Can you give them any advice about, how to think about that?
Sure. Yeah, we are all collectively, globally, in a time of transition. We are all having to reset. We're all having to find a new way in or out or around. Some people are moving, some people are breaking up, some people are getting together, some people are starting new things, some people are thinking about what they're going to do. Some people just cleaned out their junk drawer. People are in this moment of transition, and that's an exceptional opportunity for us all. It's an opportunity to say, I can think about what it is in my life that I didn't imagine as, well, frankly, I didn't imagine as a child, because really that's, for some reason, that's where we set our goal, right? It may not be specific, but I mean, when I was 10 years old, I was imagining the wedding that was going to happen in my backyard, my parents' backyard. And then I wondered, it took me till about 40. Why am I listening to a 10-year-old for life advice? Like, why am I like meeting her expectations instead of the expectations I set for myself? And so women today can take this time of transition and think about even minute, small, micro ways that they can begin to transition forward into whatever it is that they have been thinking about. Yeah. I launched SAVVY Auntie in my late 30s, which now I look at as really young, but people start careers, whole new changes in their careers in their 40s, 50s, and beyond. There's no reason why, and it doesn't mean career. It can mean whatever your life is. We're all starting again. This is, in a way, it's a rebirth. It's painful, but I'm optimistic that we're going to see some extraordinary things come out of this. And I hope the women, both obviously on your on She Speaks and on SAVVY Auntie, will hear this and think, what's the one thing I can do to move forward with my life? And maybe it's time for new dreams.
Yeah, I can't tell you just that one sentence you just said, why am I listening to a 10-year-old for advice about my life? That, wow, like that is just it's such an insight, because I think a lot of advice columnists, advice books that you see out there. I remember reading What Color is My Parachute when I was graduating from college, to kind of say, well, what do I want to do? And the first thing they say in that book, which is now like, it's a huge bestseller. It's like, how many different print, editions do they have of that book? And the first piece of advice they say is go back to what you wanted to do when you were a little kid. And it's interesting, because I often think to myself that who you are, maybe as, when you're younger, we evolve as we get older. And that that was such an interesting point of view that, when you said, why would I listen to a 10-year-old for advice about my life?
And, great, a spunky kid, but I mean,
great advice.
Yeah. Well, there are certainly things that we can think about from our childhood that we're attracted to. What, was it, the colors that always made us feel good, the sounds, the music. You can think about the things that still vibrate within you in terms of your connection, your nostalgic connection to the past. And often enough, those come back into where we are today. And that's okay, and that's good. I mean, you can bring life lessons with you, just and life experiences, and what you've learned from them today at whatever age you are. But to meet the expectations of a child is not fair to either of you.
Right. Right. Well, I love that. And I know I just realized that we are now at 29 after. So if there are questions, I think we have one here. So let me just see. Why are child-free women meant to feel less a woman, no knowledge or understanding about children because we don't have children, and we're supposed to continue to make confessions for those who have chosen to, concessions for those who have chosen to have children, not take a vacation while you don't have kids, so you can't travel, as an example. So I don't know what.
So I'm going to unpack a few of those things. And Gay, thanks for the question. You asked a bunch of the things that women are dealing with when it comes to this. So, in terms of the less than, I called my book Otherhood for a reason. And the reason is, and I get to it toward the end, and it's quite existential, is that if you actually think of yourself as other, if you think of yourself as less than mother, if you think of yourself that way, and I'm not saying that you do, Gay, or that other women do, but if you think of yourself that way, then you are. If you think of yourself as the other, then you are. And what some women will say, well, I have this smart aleck response when people say, why don't you have kids? Or when people, and what I try to do is say, no, you can't expect anybody to understand your experience if you're not honest. And so come back with an honest answer. When they ask you those things, come back with an honest answer. Now, in terms of, work, and now what's interesting, and I wrote about this again in the New York Post a couple of years ago, is there was a survey, it was a survey, a poll that was international. They looked at 20 major countries and the happiness gap between parents and non-parents. And the US was number 20, the last on the list. And part of that is because we are, we're an individualistic society. We're not a collective society. And parents would be much happier, we learn, if they include the non-parents in the family village. So it's not like, well, I'm a mom, so I get to, it's my, priority or my privilege or my whatever. And I don't love those terms, but instead of, appreciating the others who do pick up the slack. And reward them in ways like, oh, my daughter was so happy that, I was able to go to her recital. Thank you. She made this picture for you. Right? Can we create a more communal feeling about family? That could help. But again, without being, snarky or angry or what have you, be honest and authentic about your response so that others can learn that this isn't because you're, Carrie Bradshaw, just running late to get her next, pair of shoes or Cosmopolitan or whatever.
Right. We've got another one. What advice do you have for other women that want to give voice to an issue that they are passionate about? So clearly somebody who is realizing, that your passion for this and your honesty about this really resonates. So what advice do you have for other women?
Start doing it. When I launched in 2007, Twitter had just come up. well, it had yeah, it just come up, I think 2006 it launched. Facebook had just opened up for people outside of college. So, and I launched in 2008, July 2008. So I had some social media to begin to voice who I was and the cohort I was talking to. Now, I mean, I can't keep up. You know, Instagram just launched Reels yesterday. I'm like reeling from the Reels. I don't know. I cannot keep up, people. Slow down. So there's so many ways to do it and begin to do it. And one way may be, if you're not sure what that voice is, what the tone is, what you want to say, start writing it down without judging yourself. You don't show it to anybody. Just write down what it is that you're passionate about and see all the ways that you want to be able to communicate it. But I mean, the best way to do it is just get started.
Yeah. 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 And I think that is the hard thing. I think, and especially as women, I have found that, you know, we really care about getting it right. We're very earnest and we want things right. And I think that so frequently holds us back from starting something because we're just like, well, what if it's not right? What if I don't get it right? What if it's, you know, not perfect? And yeah.
Oh yeah.
You just have to kind of get out there and start it and do it. And, you know, the other thing that I've also realized, and I think there's a lot of value in saying, either writing it down that this is what you want to do, like write down, like, this is what I want to be, this is what I want to do, or tell somebody, like just put it out into the world. And there's just something amazing about if you put it out there, if you make it obvious to yourself, if you've sort of told yourself, it's something you can makes it easier to get started to go try to do it.
I agree 100%.
Okay, so I know are over on time here, but thank you so much, Melanie. I really appreciate you joining us and your honesty and authenticity. I think that is, you know, it's such a gift. And you inspire me, and I know you've inspired so many other women. So really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And you inspire me too, Elisa.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. All right. Well, great to have you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.